What is there to say about Earthbound or Mother 2 that hasn't been said already online? I'm sure most of us have stumbled across a YouTube video essay or playthrough before dissecting the game and why set person in the video finds everything about it so enchanting. But today, I want to focus entirely on something I find pretty absent of discussion on YouTube: an in-depth look into the game's incredibly diverse soundtrack and how it all came to be. How were HAL Laboratories and Ape Inc., the developers for Mother 2, going to take sound design to the next level on the new hardware of the Super Famicom? I want you and I to take a look at how good was the Earthbound or Mother 2 soundtrack actually. If this is your first time here at the channel and you love exploring fascinating music, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn all notifications on, and let me know in the comments below which other albums I should explore for a future video. I also want to give a really quick shout out to the Earthbound Mother Discord server, as well as motherforever.net, for providing me with some awesome information and historical context for this video. So shout out to y'all, and some amazing communities giving some serious justice to the lore and the legacy of the Mother game, so go check that out. Just in case you've never heard of the game before, which I don't know how that's possible, but Mother 2, or better known as Earthbound when it came to North America, was an untraditional RPG released for the Super Famicom in '94 for Japan, and in '95 the Super Nintendo for North America. The game was untraditional by featuring a way more laid-back, down-to-earth, and overall jovial setting and playstyle compared to other RPG releases at the time, focusing on everyday settings like, let's say, a local neighborhood or your department store, instead of some underground dragon lair that's glowing or something that we would see in any other run-of-the-mill RPG. Being the second entry of the Mother series, the game was pretty much unknown outside of Japan, since the first one was a Japanese exclusive. With a "This Game Stinks" campaign that included foul-smelling scratch and sniff advertisements as part of Nintendo's $2 million marketing plan to pump up the hype for the release of Earthbound in North America, the game ended up being a dud, due to critics and players alike being pretty dismissive of the game. With an off-putting marketing campaign that kind of turned people off, graphics that were seen as childlike back then instead of charming, and the tough love that RPGs didn't really seem to catch on in North America until Final Fantasy VII came about, the release of Mother 2, or Earthbound, can be summed up as a case of bad timing. However, as many of us know this story, sometimes the best medicine is time itself. Earthbound is nowadays considered an absolute essential RPG classic, and sometimes even thrown into the discussion as one of the best video games of all time. I personally never played Earthbound in the 90s when it came out. I'm one of the gabillion people who first learned that the game even existed after unlocking the game's protagonist, Ness, in Super Mario Bros. On the N64. I only played the game years later, while I was going through this retro video game collecting binge in my early 20s, good times. And from first glance, it was so easy to see why so many people fell in love with Earthbound. Instantly, you are warped into this colorful world of charming, cute, and vivid characters and settings. The game has a super fun and unique turn-based combat system, and this is seriously one of the only games I think I've ever played in my life that I actually look forward to talking to every NPC in every town. Usually I just fly through my games. I just want to get to the actual action-y parts of the game, but a significant amount of fun comes from just clicking the A button on every person you meet in Earthbound. Earthbound's presentation is its ultimate weapon. However, the tool I find that makes that weapon so powerful is the sound design behind everything. Between the music playing in the background to the little sounds and effects that make up every moment of the game, Earthbound has easily become my favorite video game OST of all time, and in 2016, New York-based independent record label Ship to Shore Phono Co. dropped a double LP vinyl record of the Mother 2 soundtrack. 4 variants existed of this exclusive pressing when it first came out, with each color representing a certain aspect or vibe from the game. I ended up scooping the Mr. Saturn Hot Spring Pink version, and I'm gonna really dive into this beautiful pressing and the insane packaging later on in this video, so make sure you stick around for that as well. During development for Mother 2, the original composers from the first game, Keiichi Suzuki and Hirokazu Tanaka, reunited to bring something new and even more exciting to the table. Now designing audio on the Super Famicom, which was ultimately the Super Nintendo in Japan, Suzuki and Tanaka had more sound channels to play with compared to previous hardware in the past. On the original Famicom, or NES, composers had an available 5 channels of basic waveforms at their disposal. However, now on the Super Famicom, the extra 3 channels opened up the door for way more layered composition, a real opportunity to paint a certain level or setting with much greater personality. Shigesato Itoi, writer and director for the Mother series, believes Earthbound was possibly the first video game to use vibrato in music. And although the approach for the Mother 2 soundtrack was very similar to the approach taken when they created the first game, Suzuki and Tanaka would frequently butt heads and debate over which sounds to use this time around, due to the immense amount of colorful instruments and potential layering they had at their command on the Super Famicom. Just like the production cycle for Mother 1, Suzuki was responsible for composing the melodies, and then Tanaka would transcribe those melodies into the sound chip. Suzuki would first compose on a synthesizer before working with fellow programmers to include those melodies into the game. Some of his personal pieces of work playing while you walk around various parts of the map outside of battle. Originally, the audio team behind the game wrote enough music to take up 8 megabits of the 24 megabit cartridge, with Suzuki even writing over 100 pieces of music for the game. However, most of it was just not included due to the sheer size that would obviously take up. And quick side note, I think it would be really cool if fellow video game composers came together today and were able to somehow get a hold of those compositions and produce them through the sound style of the Super Nintendo, a whole OST that never came to be. Due to an unusually long development cycle for Mother 2, Suzuki and Tanaka felt that their ideas were going a bit scattered. This intense creative period of experimentation was all over the place, all of this chaos beautifully coming to life in the final build of the game. The Mother 2 soundtrack, especially for the time, was painstakingly diverse. The game featured a whole bunch of inspiration, genres flying all across the board, from jazz, salsa, reggae, rock, and everything in between. During development, the Beach Boys were repeatedly referenced between Tanaka and Suzuki. The two would often listen to Brian Wilson's music while on the way to Suzuki's home. Suzuki has stated that the arrangement of percussion for the game's soundtrack was based on albums like the Beach Boys' 1967 release of Smiley Smile. Suzuki and Tanaka also wanted to make sure they included an American theme throughout the music of Mother 2, as most of the main settings in the game are meant to replicate the everyday life of American living. According to Suzuki, the two would try and pull all sorts of themes from bright and dark, dreary to humorful, anything they could that painted what they thought life was like living in America. Tanaka recalls songwriter Randy Newman as being the first American composer he could think of during this process, with albums like 1977's Little Criminals and 88's Land of Dreams being influential to the song-building process of what came to be in Mother 2. John Lennon, along with the Beatles, were also a huge driving force for the two composers. 1970's John Lennon Plastic Ono Band playing a major role as well. And just to save time for this video, the list goes on and on. Pretty much. The two pulled influence from all over the place, from film scores to Frank Zappa, who interestingly enough, Tanaka has stated would be the perfect fit to do a live performance of the Mother music. I think that's definitely a good call there. Along with all of this influence came the discussion on the subject of sampling in video games, a sensitive topic that has seen its place before in games previous, like Koji Kondo ripping some inspiration from the Japanese fusion band T-Square for the overworld theme in Super Mario. There is a brilliant video on this as well for those interested. Fellow YouTuber Thomas Game Docs goes into this in great fashion, so check that video out if you want to go into that conversation a little bit more. I'll make sure to leave it in the description. Immediately, in the opening menus of Mother 2, you can hear the trumpets of the Liberty Bell March, and this is only the beginning of sampling in the game. The game samples a variety of music from the Beatles, the Beach Boys, even the theme from the Little Rascals found its way in the game. And yeah, although this may have not been the biggest problem for the Japanese release of Mother 2 in '94, Nintendo of America did have some worry with these samples before the release of Earthbound in North America. After much review, the legal department at Nintendo decided that they were ultimately protected to some degree by the parity clause they would get with what they were doing musically. Hence, Nintendo of America went through with the inclusion of samples and sent Earthbound off into the real world. As I stated earlier in this video, the independent record label known as Ship to Shore Phono Co. released the Mother 2 soundtrack on vinyl back in 2016. Ship to Shore worked in conjunction with Sony Music Entertainment to deliver the actual soundtrack from Earthbound remastered for the vinyl medium, and this is something that can be pretty rare for legendary video game soundtracks, since a lot of times you'll find your favorite video game soundtracks put on vinyl in the form of covers or orchestral versions, for example, since they can't get the rights to the actual songs. And not taking anything away, from some of the amazing work done to bring the music to life in those ways, but it is so nice to get the actual soundtrack of Earthbound on a physical medium. It all makes the Mother 2 vinyl feel like a genuine piece of rare Earthbound memorabilia. Ship to Shore has gone on to repress the Mother 2 soundtrack with multiple variants. However, the one you are looking at in this video is my Mr. Saturn Hot Spring Pink variant, which was part of the initial release when the soundtrack first dropped. Being a double LP was completely necessary due to the large amount of songs in the game. However, even this wasn't enough to truly fit in everything, which I can see some fans possibly being a little upset about. Ship to Shore did put in most of our favorite tracks, but some vital ones are nowhere to be seen, like the main theme, for example, which I have no idea how they cannot include that in the pressing. The opening track on side A is the prologue music, and then right after that we go into the music for Unnet, the first town in the game, and I really wish they included the main theme of Earthbound. I mean, it's the theme. It's probably one of the most important tracks to include in here. Also, the Your Name Please menu, I feel like that's the best way to explain it, that comes about in the beginning of the game, it's not on here either, and that's like one of the little funkiest, freshest little songs in the game. I guess it's sad to just see some of the fan favorites from the game just get ignored for the vinyl release, and I know you can't fit everything on here, and maybe this just opens up the possibility for like a collector's edition or box set release from Ship to Shore that includes everything, and that would be definitely dope. I wouldn't mind or have a problem with picking that up, even though I picked up, the Mother 2 pressing. But I'm assuming we'll get a vinyl release of Mother 3 before we see that, so they can finish up the trilogy at Ship to Shore, which I definitely won't complain about, so I guess that's all I gotta say about that. Nevertheless, what they did include here sounds absolutely insanely good. It's gold. I would never have thought Super Nintendo music could sound so incredibly warm and high quality, and this record pressing does that for me wonderfully. I also have to applaud the overall package for this thing. They did Mother 2 justice with a beautiful traditional Japanese obi strip, a gatefold showing claymation artwork of the various characters in the game, and some mouth-watering looking vinyl to go with it all. This thing is an absolute beaut. Grade A, certified beaut. And the attention to detail Ship to Shore Phono Co. has done for such a legendary soundtrack cannot be ignored. Incredible job there with the presentation.
My name is James, and I work for motherforever.net as the site creator. A lot of people's first thoughts when it comes to Earthbound is definitely its soundtrack. It's able to invoke this sensation of feeling at home. Particularly at one moment in the game, you return to Nessa's house, and it has this somber rendition of Pollyanna from Earthbound Beginnings and Mother 1. This somber yet welcoming tone really gives me the feeling that I'm going on a journey for a very long time. but it also gives me a feeling that I can always return home and check up on family. Something that's so very powerful with the Earthbound soundtrack is that it doesn't need lyrics or words or anything to tell you a story. I feel like Earthbound itself, if it just was completely comprised of music, it would tell you a story and let you have these feelings that some people will probably never realize that they had at the time. So it's very particularly interesting to see everyone else's insight when it comes to listening to the Earthbound soundtrack. Again, my own personal feelings with Pollyanna is a lot more different than somebody else's. It gives you the ability to feel different aspects of your life within its soundtrack. In a sense, to sum it up, it's beautiful.
So, with all this being said, how good was the Earthbound or Mother 2 soundtrack actually? I find most of my favorite video game soundtracks ultimately stem from the idea of nostalgia. Whenever I hear them, I am immediately warped back to a simpler time, and I find joy replaying the emotions or feelings set music brought me in the past. And yeah, I can differentiate what I personally find to be appealing to me by the sound itself, but the concept of nostalgia, if I had to be honest, plays such an undeniably big role in deciding what my favorite video game soundtracks are that I'm sure I'm annoyingly ignoring other games that deserve the attention. So what's funny about the case with Earthbound and why this is my favorite gaming soundtrack is it's a game I never played growing up, and I'm sure this is the case for many of you as well. I only played the game fully through a couple years ago, and to find myself loving the soundtrack for its immense diversity, quirky charm, and literal structure without any sort of past memories further pushing the reasoning, it's a refreshing departure from nostalgia and nostalgia only being the factor. With a nerve-wracking development cycle and unbelievably interesting story behind the growth of popularity, the Mother series is a story told many times. I only touched up on the music here. Go on YouTube and look up everything else about the Mother series. It's amazing. And I hope this video shines some light on the fascinating history behind the audio production of the game. What are some of your favorite video game soundtracks? Let me know in the comments below, as well as any musical projects or albums you'd want me to dive into for a future video on the channel. I also invite you to check out my Patreon page if you want to gain access to some really cool rewards and exclusive benefits, all while helping out the channel, as it really goes a long way, and I cannot thank everyone enough who has already joined. So thank you so much for watching the video. I hope you have an incredible rest of your day or evening, wherever you are. And yeah, we'll talk soon, alright? Much love, your boy, Pad Chennington.